There is a particular type of danger that never looks dangerous. It dresses well, it speaks beautifully, it convinces you that morality is a limitation, and that pleasure is a form of wisdom. The Picture of Dorian Gray is not a story about a man who becomes evil. It is a story about a man who becomes educated in the wrong way. Oscar Wilde understood something that still unsettles us today, that beauty can excuse almost anything, that intelligence can become a shield, and that the most destructive ideas are often the most elegant. This is a novel about influence, about what happens when we allow ideas to shape us without asking what they cost. And by the time that you realize what has been taken from you, the portrait has already begun to change. Let's explore Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. When people talk about dark academia, they often point to candlelit libraries, ancient languages, secret knowledge, and beautiful young minds destroyed by ideas. But long before the genre had a name, Oscar Wilde had already written one of its purest expressions. The Picture of Dorian Gray is not just a novel about corruption, it is a novel about influence, about the danger of ideas when they are separated from responsibility, and about what happens when beauty becomes a moral alibi. This is not a story where evil arrives suddenly, it arrives elegantly, it speaks well, it quotes philosophy, and by the time it reveals its cost, it is already too late. Before we get into the story, I want to discuss a little bit about the prologue and what it means. Wilde's challenge to the reader. Before the story even begins, Wilde confronts us with a prologue, a series of aphorisms that function not as a preface, but as a philosophical trap. These lines are often quoted, but rarely examined, and frequently misunderstood. He says, there is no such thing as a moral or an immoral book. He says that all art is quite useless. Now, at first glance, these statements seem defensive, even evasive, as though Wilde were trying to shield himself from accusations of corruption. But the prologue is not a retreat, it is a challenge. Wilde is not claiming that art has no effect. He is claiming something far more unsettling, that art does not behave in the way that morality demands it should. Art does not instruct, it does not purify, it does not offer safe conclusions. Instead, it reflects the reader, their desires, their hypocrisies, their secret sympathies. The prologue dares us to stop asking whether art is good or bad, and to start asking why we want it to be. This matters, of course, because Dorian Gray is a novel that seduces. If the reader finds themselves agreeing with Lord Henry or admiring Dorian, lingering over descriptions of beauty and excess, then Wilde's point has already been proven. The discomfort surrounding the novel has never been about what it depicts, but about what it reveals in those who read it. Placed at the threshold of the book, the prologue reframes everything that follows it. It warns us not that the story is dangerous, but that it might be. So, the Picture of Dorian Gray emerged from a society obsessed with surfaces. Victorian England prized propriety, discipline, and moral certainty, while simultaneously indulging a fascination with decadence, secrecy, and forbidden desire. Wilde lived inside this contradiction. Publicly, he was celebrated as a wit and aesthete. Privately, he navigated a world that would eventually destroy him for refusing to conform. Wilde's aesthetic philosophy that art for art's sake was not merely literary, it was existential. Beauty and pleasure and style were not distractions from meaning, they were meaning. Yet Dorian Gray reveals a deep anxiety beneath this belief. What happens, Wilde asks, when beauty ceases to be a gateway to insight and becomes a substitute for conscience? This is the world that produces Dorian, a world where elegance masks cruelty, where intelligence provides cover for indifference, and where corruption rarely looks corrupt. Dorian Gray enters the novel almost empty. His defining characteristic is not vanity, but suggestibility. In fact, he does not initially worship beauty at all, he learns to. And this is crucial. Dorian's tragedy is not that he desires pleasure, but that he allows others to teach him what pleasure should mean. So when Dorian wishes that the portrait might age in his place, the moment is often framed as supernatural horror, but it is also an intellectual awakening. For the first time, Dorian understands that youth grants him exemption, that beauty insulates, and that consequences are negotiable. From this point on, Dorian's moral framework collapses quietly. He does not revel in cruelty, he rationalizes it. Other people become experiences, sensations, and phrases in an education dedicated not to wisdom, but to simulation. And this is why I think Dorian belongs so completely to dark academia. He is not uneducated, he is overeducated in the wrong direction. He has learned how to aestheticize suffering, how to turn life into material, and how to mistake refinement for depth. Within the book, there are other characters which come to symbolize other themes, such as Lord Henry Wotton. He represents influence without responsibility. If Dorian is corruption realized, Lord Henry is corruption articulated. He does not act, he persuades. He believes that influence should be exercised without accountability, that ideas are experiments best conducted on other people. Wilde gives Lord Henry the most intoxicating language in the novel, and that is no accident. His aphorisms feel dangerous because they feel true. He dismantles morality not through force, but through charm. Listening to him feels like being let in on a secret, a higher, more liberated way of thinking. But Lord Henry never pays the price for his philosophy. He remains untouched, ironic, and amused. In this, he represents one of the central anxieties of dark academia, that brilliance can excuse detachment, and that intellectual play can devastate lives while leaving the thinker intact. Lord Henry does not ruin Dorian by commanding him to sin. He ruins him by making sin sound interesting. Next we have Basil Hallward. He represents art, love, and moral fear. Basil Hallward stands apart from the novel's cynicism. He believes that art matters, not as decoration, but as revelation. His terror lies in the knowledge that he has put too much of himself into the portrait, and that art, once created, exposes truths the artists cannot control. Basil's love for Dorian is sincere, it's reverent, and deeply afraid. He senses that beauty can be destructive, not because it is false, but because it is powerful. Where Lord Henry aestheticizes influence, Basil fears it. His fate marks the novel's moral point of no return. With Basil's death, conscience is not merely silenced, it is eliminated. The tragedy is not that Dorian commits murder, but that he does so without awakening. I want to talk next about Wilde's prose. This is inseparable from the novel's argument. It is beautiful, it is polished, and irresistibly quotable. But this elegance is not neutral. Wilde uses language to enact the very danger he describes. Naturally, we are meant to enjoy the book, we are meant to be dazzled, and in doing so, we are meant to recognize how easily beauty persuades us to forgive what we should condemn. The novel does not lecture, but it does tempt. In this way, Dorian Gray turns the reader into a participant. The question is never simply whether Dorian is corrupt, but whether we are willing to be charmed by the same ideas. At the novel's centre lies the infamous chapter of objects, Dorian's immersion into rare books and jewels and fabrics and perfumes, musical instruments and religious artifacts. Critics, along with many other readers, have often dismissed this entire section as being indulgent and kind of laborious. But it is here that Wilde reveals the true cost of aesthetic detachment. Dorian replaces moral reflection with curation. He does not seek understanding, he seeks possession. Beauty becomes something to catalogue and to control and to consume. Each object is exquisite, lifeless, and safe. This chapter mirrors academic obsession at its darkest. Knowledge pursued not to eliminate the world, but to escape it. Culture becomes insulation. Scholarship becomes anesthetic. Surrounded by beauty, Dorian no longer has to look at himself. And what of the portrait itself? Well, the portrait functions not as punishment, but as a record. It insists on truth in a world devoted to surfaces. Each change reflects not only the sin, but indifference, the slow erosion of empathy. Dorian does not fear being evil, he fears being seen. His final act is not repentance, but an attempt to destroy evidence. The novel's bleakness lies in its refusal to grant redemption. There is no moral awakening, only the collapse of illusion. And why is this book mentioned every time someone discusses dark academia? Well, it belongs to dark academia because it understands that education does not guarantee virtue and that beauty does not ensure goodness. It shows us how culture can become camouflage, how intellect can excuse cruelty, and how refinement can coexist with emptiness. It is a novel about mentorship, about influence, secrecy, and the quiet violence of ideas. It asks whether knowledge elevates us or merely gives us better language with which to excuse ourselves. So in the end, Wilde does not condemn beauty. He condemns worship without responsibility. Dorian Gray endures because it refuses to tell us what to think. Instead, it asks us to notice what we admire and why. The novel's true horror is not the portrait, but the possibility that elegance can make us indifferent to suffering, that brilliance can replace conscience, that beauty, unmoored from ethics, can hollow us out entirely. And that is why The Picture of Dorian Gray remains one of the darkest academic novels ever written, not because it depicts corruption, but because it shows how easily we learn to call it something else. So that is Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. Have you read it? Do you want to read it? Let me know in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe to this channel, and I'll be seeing you again soon for more video essays. Bye-bye.